Welcome to the Comic Sauce Podcast, where we talk comics and comics culture. I am Henry Liu, and today I'm joined by Christian Diadamo. Christian, how's it going?
How's it going, Henry? I am doing great right now.
I'm doing great as well. All right. The Comic Sauce Podcast can be found on Twitter and Instagram at Comic Sauce Pod. And today we're going to talk some Moon Knight. Moon Knight is the latest Marvel Disney Plus show to drop, and it just finished. Season 1 Moon Knight just finished this past Wednesday. Today is Friday, May 6th, and yeah, we're hot off the presses here. The show ended on Wednesday, May 4th. So pretty fresh in our minds. We're going to get into it. We're going to go deep into Moon Knight. So before we get into the show itself, maybe we can talk a little bit about our thoughts going in, even before the season started. Like, what was our anticipation level? What was our familiarity with this character? What were your thoughts going into the season, Christian?
Let's see. Moon Knight has always been like a cult favorite type of character. Um, I've never really read much Moon Knight on his own. He's a character I've definitely like seen a bunch in crossovers, and I have liked in crossovers. He's kind of this like really weird, unhinged character, and like he does um he does get compared to Batman a bit. I think just as this dark figure of the night, of someone who dealing with kind of it's multiple personality disorder, right? Dissociative identity disorder. Batman doesn't deal with that, but there's a lot of duality in the character, as well as the background of New York versus like Gotham. Um, so I was definitely intrigued. I think a lot of people have been asking for Moon Knight for a long time that I've seen online, and I was excited to see what they were gonna do. I was pretty anticipated, and I thought this was they were like, oh, this is cool to get something like a little darker and weirder.
Right on. Yeah, I had a similar feel too. We had an episode on our most anticipated of this year, of the year 2022, and this show, Moon Knight, was my number one most anticipated show of the year. So yeah, I was definitely looking forward to it, and I was pretty familiar with the character too. I read quite a bit of Moon Knight, solo Moon Knight, as well as like team ups and stuff. And yeah, just a quick shout out. The Warren Ellis run on Moon Knight is particularly awesome. Like, that's the run I would most recommend to check out. And yeah, you mentioned the Batman comparison. Yeah, it's pretty apparent that Moon Knight was Marvel's crack at Batman. He's like a knockoff, a Batman knockoff, born of the 70s. And not only is Moon Knight kind of a Batman knockoff, but um, Moon Knight is also kind of a horror crossover character. His first appearance wasn't in Moon Knight #1. It was in Werewolf by Night 32. So he was in a werewolf comic book. Um, so kind of cool. He had some horror origins. And yeah, interesting that there are some Batman parallels, because we talked about this before, but the month of March this year saw the release of the new Batman movie and the new Moon Knight series. So we were kind of looking forward to this sort of like head to head sort of thing, Batman and Moon Knight. And now we've seen both. And today we're going to get into the show. And let's just give the big spoiler alert now. We're going to go into great depth in the show, including plot spoilers, etc. So be warned. Okay, the Moon Knight show, 6 episodes. Like I said, just wrapped up a couple days ago. Let's talk about what we liked about the show. Yeah, you want to start, Christian? What aspects of
Yeah.
the show did you enjoy?
I guess let's start off with I think the biggest positive, Oscar Isaac as Moon Knight. I think he does a wonderful job here. Probably one of like arguably one of the best I think performances for an MCU superhero. I think the way he plays the characters of Steven and Mark and the way he kind of plays off of himself is really fun to watch. I think when he's just out of the costume and trying to interact with himself and like while also trying to interact with other characters, or in episode 5 where you kind of see the psyche of his mind. I think he does a wonderful job here. He really like carries this show on his back. He he is Moon Knight, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I'm in total agreement too. I think Oscar Isaac's performance here is the biggest highlight of the show. And when I say performance, it's a singular performance, but it's across multiple characters, right? And pretty cool that the show starts with the Stephen Grant character, because the persona most associated with Moon Knight is Mark Spector. So kind of throws a curveball at you right away, right? With this Stephen Grant guy. And the Stephen Grant character is very unlike characters Oscar Isaac has played before. I mean, you think about Poe Dameron and these sort of like confident and action oriented characters he's played. Um, this is a total 180 from that, right? That's the Mark Spector character. The Mark Spector character kind of more closely resembles Poe Dameron, right? But yeah, Mark and Steven are so different. It's cool. You can see those differences, and it's amazing that it's the same actor playing these different characters, and it is so distinct. And man, he's pretty amazing. Kind of just turning that switch on and off, and you can see it happening like right in front of you in real time. And it's a pretty phenomenal performance for sure. Yeah, big props to Oscar Isaac. And I think Marvel, they really they landed a great actor for this role, and he didn't disappoint. They're probably super stoked when he agreed to do this character, and yeah, he didn't mail it in. Great performance. All right.
Yeah. I really liked the way that like I guess going off of that, they do start with Steven at the beginning
Yeah.
and he's unsure of what's going on, and that's a good way to I guess to bring the viewer kind of more into it
Yep.
because you're kind of on Steven's side, you're not really sure what's going on, where and like over time you get more of who Mark is, and I think the big reveal that Mark is the original person and Steven is kind of the split,
Yeah.
quote unquote, feels like a really big moment in episode 5. Eh, and like I think and also I did really like, we already did give the spoiler warning already.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh how they bring in Jake at the end and he's speaking Spanish.
Right.
We only got
Right.
a little bit, but I thought it was even that like the third personality was cool to see. Nice
Yeah.
little tease.
Yeah. Yeah. We can maybe talk about this more later, but um, I know in the comics, Moon Knight is primarily these three personalities, right? Mark Spector, Stephen Grant and Jake Lockley. And knowing that, I kept looking for Jake Lockley, and I was like, where is the third persona, right? And interestingly, they kind of hinted at a third persona throughout the season, but it wasn't until the very end. I mean, we're talking the post-credit scene where we actually get to see Jake. Cool that we got to see him, but kind of wondering if it might have been cooler if he was in throughout the season, right? So I don't know, something to think about, I guess. But yeah, back to the point about starting with Stephen Grant, that made sense to me. It was like a curveball, kind of cool, but Stephen Grant really is like the relatable persona, right? So it does make sense that the show started with him. You get to know him, and he's like a very like ordinary guy with ordinary people type problems, right? So I thought that was a cool entryway into the show. Now, what else? Anything else good?
Let's see. I get like I think anything else good that didn't directly involve Oscar Isaac because I really do think Oscar Isaac is really kind of what carries the show. Um, let's see. I do think that the uh the Egyptian stuff I'm kind of mixed on, but I'll talk about I guess the good stuff before I talk about the bad stuff. I think we haven't really seen that yet in the MCU, and it does kind of bring like a freshness to it. I
Sure.
think there's like a bit of a dungeon crawl in episode 4, like a catacombs Indiana Jones raid.
Yes.
As you go through, and there's that monster going like following them that attacks Layla. I thought that was really cool, and I think it's the overall art direction for I think the more fantastic stuff I liked. The CGI I do think was a bit lacking at times, but the overall art direction was really strong. I really like the sand ship going across the dunes, and then when you see Mark in the vast field of reeds, and the way it kind of moves between these different locations, I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a good call out. Yeah, I too wasn't a big fan of the CG in the show a whole lot, but now that you mention it, just the visual feel of the show, like you mentioned, the art direction, yeah, pretty cool. Interesting. I know there have been some comparisons to Legion, the show Legion. Definitely has kind of a psychedelic vibe to it, and that is interesting, for sure. Um, there is a lot of like mental wellness questions that pop up during the show, and some mental instability type themes, and the visuals of the show do capture that pretty well, I think. And yeah, it's kind of a treat to look at times. I will say that. Okay, so I know the two of us had some issues with the show, so I think we can start getting into the negatives. Um, we probably have quite a few to list. Maybe we'll start with this. And I'm curious if this is even a negative to you. Um, one of the negatives on my list was that the show actually is not very faithful to the comics. It's very unfaithful to the Marvel comics. And to me that's not like the death knell, right? Necessarily. But man, they took a lot of liberties with Moon Knight and kind of everything about Moon Knight comics with this show. Um, so where to start here? Let's see. So, first off, Moon Knight's powers. So in the comics, like we've been saying, Moon Knight in the comics is very much a Marvel version of Batman. Batman being a non-super powered hero. And Moon Knight in the comics is pretty much like that. There's kind of an interesting twist where he has enhanced abilities at night, and particularly when the moon is out. Like when there's a full moon out, like don't fuck with Moon Knight, right? But for the most part, he's like just a highly trained regular dude. Now with the show, man, you talk about a complete change from that. The Moon Knight superhero in this show is really like a superhero with almost godlike powers. Like bullets are useless to him. You can impale him with spears. He can fly. I mean, there's like nothing he can't do here. And you talk about a complete change. That's a huge one. A lot of the characters were kind of changed. In the comics, there's this character Frenchie who is not in the show at all. There's this like Easter egg kind of reference to him, I think. Um, but he's like Moon Knight's best bud, and also kind of like his dude in the chair, more like his transporter, like he's his driver or something. But um, yeah, he's missing. There's the character Marlene from the comics. She's not in the show at all. So they completely changed Moon Knight from the comics. And but one more thing. Uh, so again, with the Batman comparison, Batman is like synonymous with Gotham City and an urban environment. That's Moon Knight in the comics also, right? He's the protector of travelers of the night. And in the comics, oftentimes that's him, protecting people from the crime-ridden streets of New York City and a lot of urban environments. And again, this show completely strays from that. We talked about how it's kind of cool. We have that the Egyptian themes and the cool look and feel of it. I mean, this show takes place in like the corners of Moon Knight's mind, and we see psychedelic imagery. We see the sands of Egypt, and we talk about a very different kind of vibe from urban settings, right? So that kind of rubbed me the wrong way a bit. Um, yeah, what did you think about that? Like that how, I mean, you mentioned how you weren't super familiar with like solo Moon Knight books, but now that you have heard my take on it, like what's your feel about how unfaithful this show is to the Moon Knight comics?
Huh, that is a good point because like there's a lot that I don't know about Moon Knight, so it is really interesting to hear about, about how faithful versus unfaithful it is. Um, I've also heard, is this correct? So are the personalities switched? Like, I've heard that in the comics, Steven is the one who's like very rich. Um,
True.
and like, is he more like kind of Jake at the end, where is Steven kind of the killer? Where, um, is Jake more of maybe more like Steven in the show?
That
Like,
is a good question because I don't think there's a definitive answer. Because I think early Moon Knight, it was like Mark, Steven, and Jake, and Moon Knight would almost like kind of switch between the personalities to whatever situation worked best for him. And having this dissociative issue wasn't a problem. He actually used it to his advantage. It wasn't until like more modern Moon Knight comics where it was actually like some sort of like mental limitation and something he really struggled with, like he does in this show, right? But yeah, I think if you were to look at different Moon Knight comics over the ages, you would get a different answer to your question, basically.
okay, all right. Like, as I think with everything else, like I think from what I've seen, yeah, he's always only been with New York City, and he definitely felt more in line with characters like Daredevil, you know. Um, So like this definitely wasn't what I was expecting, I think, where they were gonna take Moon Knight. I know that it does seem like the MCU does want to move away a bit more from New York City. Um as a whole. I mean, a lot of Marvel does take place in New York in general, and a lot of what's
Yeah.
going on does take place
Yep.
there. So I guess I could see why they might move away from it. But I was like hoping that they would get more into the Batman-y type of stuff. Like
Yeah.
as a big Batman fan, it would be cool to see, to see that from the Marvel perspective, the Marvel take on Batman in a sense, quote unquote. I like,
Right.
I don't want to call him like a ripoff or anything, or or say that I just want to see more Batman. But I think like the shadowy creature of the night, who goes around and fights bad guys, in New York is just cool, and that like also just I guess it goes to a point is that it felt like we didn't really see a lot of Moon Knight in the costume, and a lot of what we got was only just him fighting these like demon dogs for the most part, or like demonic type characters that felt
Right.
like really CGI heavy, and they were like kind of short, and the choreography was not the best most of the time.
Yep.
And so I think if they kind of reeled back on that and had him fight, bad guys in New York, they could have had a little more of the Moon Knight character. Am I onto
Yeah.
something? Like, I guess as someone who hasn't read as much, does that seem more in line with Moon Knight? Is that something that you would want to see more of?
Absolutely. 100%. Kind of like what you're alluding to. I wanted to see some more Batman shit. I wanted to see a whole lot more Batman shit. As it was, it seemed like they were trying really hard, I would argue too hard, to try to make this as non-Batman as possible, right? They wanted it to be fantasy and supernatural stuff rather than realistic and urban, right? Um, and I think it makes sense that they took that approach because you know Batman is hugely popular, and shoot, a Batman movie just came out, and there's more to come. And guess what? Marvel TV shows have delved in this territory. If you look at the Marvel Netflix stuff, um, particularly Daredevil, we've seen this kind of stuff, right? So I can understand why they would go in a totally different direction, right? They were probably concerned that a lot of people would say, well, we've already seen this with Batman, or we've already seen this with Daredevil, or, even with the Punisher, we've seen it time and again. Why not try something completely different? Which they did. But the results were definitely mixed, right? Um, and you know what? I'll say that their approach could have worked. I think it could have worked, but the execution wasn't quite there. Um, so one of the big problem points to me is the powers. Like I mentioned how the powers are very different from the comics, and that was already kind of a sore spot. Um, but I think what really bugged me about all that was that they never explained his powers at all. Like, give me an idea of what this guy can do. Right. So when I'm seeing Moon Knight in action, like at first it's really exciting. You're like, oh shit, finally we can see the full Moon Knight suit. We can see Moon Knight kicking some ass. This is great. But then, after a few fights in, like I'm just scratching my head, going like, what can this guy do? Like when some bad guys shoot him, they fire bullets into him. I'm like, oh shit, did they just kill him? But no, the bullets apparently have no effect on Moon Knight in the show, right? So like, I want to know like what the deal is, right? And I know these shows don't want to spend a lot of screen time just doing exposition. But give me some idea of what this guy can do and what he can't do. Um, yeah, especially with a new character, right? With the Disney Plus shows to date, usually it's been characters we are familiar with, oftentimes very familiar with, right? So they don't need to spend time explaining what Falcon can do, what Vision can do, etc. Right? Um, this is a new character. Like they should let people know what's going on, and uh, we got none of that. So like, I thought of the Hawkeye series a little bit, and we got a new character there, Kate Bishop, and they didn't spend a lot of time explaining her abilities and stuff, but they had this little, I think it was this little montage explaining how she was really inspired by Clint Barton at an early age, and then she trained in archery and martial arts, and you just got a sense of what she could do. Right? She's a normal person. She has no superpowers, but well, she's driven by this early obsession with Hawkeye, and she put in the work. She trained a lot, right? So she's highly skilled, right? So give me something like that, like some kind of explanation. Didn't get that at all, and yeah, it made the fights, which are already very like CG heavy, it made them even more just kind of like I had no stake in it. I was just watching this CG spectacle. There was really no narrative tension because I didn't know what he could do. It's just like watching someone play a video game or something. So that was a big sore spot for me. That was a big problem.
Yeah, that is another good point because like yeah, this is the first time we've seen Moon Knight on screen like ever,
Yeah.
really. Um, because I think like if I think of like other like big Marvel characters, even if they don't explain their power set in the MCU and what they're capable of, there's usually some other like some form of media that does that, like kind of what they did with say like Spider-Man. Because like you kind of and they like clue you into this character very very quickly,
Mhm.
whereas like it does feel like they don't really say much about Moon Knight himself, what he's capable of, and he just kind of throws out powers out of nowhere.
Yeah,
Like I think the flight only shows up like real quick once in episode 6, if I'm correct.
I think so.
And I remember seeing that and be like, "Wait, what? He does that? Like
Right.
he could do that? Wait, what? Like was he able to do that this whole time?" Like and I was like, yeah, very confused on some like things in this character. And it is interesting here, like about like who he really is, who he is in the comics. And I think it does make you wonder a bit. Like it's like, man, it's like they were gonna do Moon Knight, but why didn't they do Moon Knight? You know?
Yeah. 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 Again, I understand why they went in the direction that they did go in, this whole Egyptian mythology and fantasy angle, but um you gotta make it work. Like explain shit. Like, and it's not just the powers too. I felt like just overall uh the show was very confusing. Like the plot was kind of hard to follow, and yeah, kind of a big mess. Like I started out tuned in, and then when I started to get like sort of agitated by like the confusing power set and the confusing plot, I sort of checked out a bit, and I just sort of became disconnected from the show. I just sort of watched it out of obligation in a way, and didn't really like invest into the plot or the characters so much. So yeah, kind of unfortunate. Maybe the sort of disjointed plot was partially to do with like the mental state of Moon Knight, of Stephen and Mark. Um, but yeah, it wasn't helping that I was already kind of like checked out in a way, and the show was just kind of a mess and didn't like do anything to like draw me back in, put it that way.
Yeah, how did you feel about like the whole Amit versus like Big Khonshu, like kind of the Egyptian god politics angle, the big, I guess, external conflict?
Yeah, that
Because that
that
was kind of the part I think I checked out the
yeah,
most on,
oh,
you
me
know?
too. No, that whole stuff, that whole thing was like completely uninteresting to me, and especially at the end when you see like essentially two giant monsters fighting in mediocre CGI, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like I think like anything to do with the internal struggle I was invested in, like the mystery of who Mark was and who Steven was.
Yeah.
I think they focus a lot on that on episode 1 and I was like very intrigued on where this is going to go next.
Mm-hmm.
And like as you're learning about who Mark is, I was like, okay, this is interesting, but I think once they got more into the external conflict of like fighting Amit and the bad guy Harrow,
Yeah.
I was definitely like like I think the big politic court in episode 3 I did check out a bit on as much as I did love like Khonshu taking over, I think Mark and like him essentially taking on another character in that moment. But because I liked Mark, you know,
Yeah.
not because I liked the court scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely agree with what a lot of what you mentioned. I would add too that, we've mentioned the CG in this show. There is a lot of CG in this show. I would say way too much. And yeah, the big like Egyptian god battle at the end is just like way overboard, like a little reminiscent of the two dragons battling at the end of Shang-Chi, pretty corny. Um, but hey, let's talk about the Moon Knight costume itself. And I guess the Moon Knight and the Mr. Knight costume. Um, Clearly they went the CG route here. Um, yeah, I had some issues here too, man. Like a cool part of the MCU is cool costumes, For the most part, the MCU has adapted comic book costumes to shows and movies quite well. You take a costume that could potentially look very corny in a movie, the Captain America suit, they made it look pretty damn cool. And they've done that time and again. So they went a completely different way here. Clearly, the costumes in this show are not actual, you know, costume design, practical costumes. They're like totally CG'd, and yeah, that's I mean that's not the Moon Knight I know. Like we keep talking about the Batman comparison, but Moon Knight is much more of a Batman character than a supernatural force, right? So I was not a fan of the Moon Knight suit here. They were going for kind of a mummy sort of look. Yeah, it didn't work for me. What'd you think?
Hmm. I think it was the Mark Spector Moon Knight costume was it felt a little too like overdone, you know. I don't want to say I hated it. I it did look very obviously CGI. Like it was like I was okay with it. I did get a bit of oh man. I don't I kind of hate making this comparison, but like kind of like the Green Lantern suit. That might be I don't know if that's a little far, but it's like kind of a little too much. I think I much
Oh,
preferred
right.
the um the Mr. Knight costume. I think that was like a little more sleek. It looked like that could be like a real costume somebody would be wearing, where there's like a bit of a suit, there's just the plain white mask, you know. It felt a little more like I like that they kind of that felt more like something like that I would see like a comic book come to life, you know. It felt like a little I like the more grounded version rather than I think the big Mark Spector Moon Knight mummy outfit, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, cool. So, what about the villain? So, the villain of the show is Arthur Harrow, played by Ethan Hawke. Kind of an interesting choice. The character of Harrow does exist from the comics, but he's definitely not known as Moon Knight's arch nemesis, right? He's more of a secondary villain at best. So yeah, kind of an interesting choice. Yeah, what'd you think about this villain?
I wasn't as big on Harrow. I thought he had a in episode 1 where you first see him and, and he's judging the person and he has the scales on his arm that move. I thought that was a really intriguing opening to his character. I couldn't wait to see where they went with this like this cult-like figure who had this kind of sense of charisma. I thought Ethan Hawke played him as well as he could, but it just I don't know. I kind of lost track of his character. I think I wasn't as into Harrow, but I did like him as the psychologist like when they kind of
Mm,
bring him back
yeah,
midway through episode 4 and that like dream sequence. I thought it was great. It was like confusing and it was like not what I was expecting. So I thought he even though that wasn't really Harrow, it was more of just a more another machination within Mark's mind. I liked that part, but I think when they kind of come back to him, he felt I think a little flat.
yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. I found this villain very uninteresting. I was pretty checked out on him. Similarly, though, I would say he was interesting initially. Yeah, when you first get to know this guy, I wanted to see more of him. I wanted to see what he was all about. Um, yeah, pretty interesting about the whole like the judgment thing. And I thought it was cool that he was like this cult leader, right? So when the show started, I thought, oh man, is this gonna be like Moon Knight takes on Nexium or some shit like that, right? Like Moon Knight versus a cult. That sounded pretty interesting to me. Um, if it was more like that and they didn't delve into like all the supernatural stuff and some pretty incredible superpowers on display. I thought maybe could have worked a lot better, right? But yeah, it just kind of went off the deep end soon after that initial episode, I think. Yeah, speaking of Harrow, um, he's basically a regular guy that has like this interesting like judgment power. But later on, he gets this like super powered staff, and he becomes like kind of like what we've been saying with Moon Knight. He becomes like a character with almost godlike powers, right? So they're going toe to toe, and when they're fighting, um, I alluded to this earlier, but I have no idea what Moon Knight can do. I have no idea what Harrow can do with his staff. And I'm just like checked out, man. I'm like, I don't know who can do what. And I'm just watching these guys go at it. And it's just not making a whole lot of sense to me. So yeah. Um, could have been so much more here. Could have been so much better. But yeah, I feel like some poor decisions were made and the execution really wasn't there. It really wasn't. Yeah, I think we can go on and on about like the negatives on the show. Um, but I don't know. Any just random thoughts, good or bad, about Moon Knight?
Hmm. Yeah. Let's see. So I guess like how much do you want to talk about episode 6? I think the final episode, the what happens in the finale, and I think things that happen that set up for the future. I guess
Yeah.
the first thought I'm going to start off is so like Layla and the character should be Scarlet Scarab
Mm-hmm.
that comes out at the end of the show and has a big fight becomes what's her name, Tamaret's avatar.
Yep.
So like I guess my first question is like, so like, is that part of the comics? Is that like, I've heard of Scarlet Scarab, but is that how it generally goes? Is she like a prominent Moon Knight character? Is she her own thing?
Yeah, I was asking these same questions because I didn't know when I was watching the show. I didn't know if this was a character they just made up for the show. I had no point of reference in the comics. As it turns out, after a little bit of research, the Scarlet Scarab is a Marvel character in the comics. But first of all, it was a male character, and second of all, it has nothing to do with Moon Knight. It's not a Moon Knight character. It's like I think he first appeared in like a Thor comic or something. And I guess thirdly, it's a pretty obscure character. So yeah, it really the Scarlet Scarab really had nothing to do with Moon Knight in the comics, and I think this Layla character is completely new. She definitely didn't appear in Moon Knight, and I think they just kind
Oh,
of
really?
gender swapped the secret identity of Scarlet Scarab, um, and turned him into this character. So, for all intents and purposes, a brand new character.
Okay. Like, I don't know. Like, I guess what do you have any thoughts on Layla or the Scarlet Scarab? Because I think like um I did like Layla when she was brought in. I thought like, oh, it was interesting. Oh, Mark's been married for all this time and has history with this character. And I thought they bounce off kind of well enough, and then you find out that Mark kills her dad,
Right, right.
or killed her dad previously, and it's this big thing that they weirdly never resolve in the final act when they finally meet back up to
Right,
get what
it's
like
true.
together,
Yeah.
and then she becomes she becomes her own superhero at the end at a like what kind of feels like out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if they were. I didn't know it's like, are they a team in the comics? That like I was. I like. I guess didn't really have much of a point of reference here.
Yeah, they definitely weren't a team in the comics. Although I mentioned the omission of the Marlene character from the comics. I think the Layla character is essentially replacing the Marlene character because the Marlene is like the love interest for Moon Knight in the comics, and Layla is essentially that in the show. And yeah, I'm kind of with you. I was sort of interested in their relationship in the show, kind of complicated, and they had good chemistry. And yeah, I kind of wanted to see more. Like, where was this headed? But yeah, going back to what you're talking about, episode 6. Um, yeah, that is when Layla becomes the Scarlet Scarab. She becomes a superhero, right? Um, yeah, kind of like what you're saying, a little bit out of nowhere. Um, I don't know. It reminded me a little bit of when Pepper Potts becomes a superhero in like Iron Man 3. And it's just sort of like just done just for the hell of it. It didn't really, it was kind of out of place, right? And it was a little bit pandering, a little bit forced. Um, I don't know, kind of cool though with Layla. Uh, Here's where I kind of had an issue though. Um, like there is a scene after she becomes the Scarlet Scarab, and a young Egyptian girl sees her, right? And she's kind of inspired, right? And yeah, it's kind of a nice moment, right? Because you know we haven't seen an Egyptian superhero on screen, so we're getting that here. That's kind of cool. No question about it, right? Pretty cool. I felt they kind of stepped on the moment a bit, though. I think that if they just left it at that, they see this young Egyptian girl seeing an Egyptian superhero and being excited about it. That's all we need to see, right? That's cool. But they decided to throw in this really clunky dialogue, right? Where the girl says, "Are you an Egyptian superhero?" And then Layla says, "Yes, I am." And it's just so forced. Like it just, it's like really, really sloppy writing, you know? And again, it could have worked like 20 times better if they just left it without that dialogue. Like just the imagery you see, that's all you need to see, right? So yeah, like a lot of the show, I think uh the decisions they made are a little questionable, but ultimately they could have made it work with some slicker execution. But man, it was just sloppy in a lot of places. And yeah, well, I think ultimately the Layla character was just kind of uneven and was kind of all over the place, you know. So a little bit of a miss there, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. I think that like would you say this would have been something better for like season 2? Like a season 2 idea, you know?
Oh,
Like
introducing like a new superhero,
yeah,
Layla becoming a superhero. Yeah. Hey, so we talk about this all the time, but now there's been quite a few Marvel Disney Plus shows. It seems like every season finale, they decide to do this where they just go overboard with the CG and they throw in too much stuff, right? Um, I don't know what's going on over there, but it seems like they're doing this every time and it never works. Well, maybe I shouldn't say never because I think you could argue that Loki had kind of a strong ending. But I don't know, like it seems like pretty much every time it's a fail. And this is one of the bigger ones, right? There's tons of CG and they just threw everything at you, right? As if seeing two Egyptian gods battle and uh multiple Moon Knight personas battling Harrow. Then we also get like the introduction of a new superhero, right? So like it's just yeah, it's too much. What are your thoughts?
yeah, like it's weird how we see this time and time again.
Yeah,
Like with each Marvel Disney Plus thing, and even felt like we saw this in Boba Fett, like where like it's like it feels like 2 episodes in one, and while the rest of the story had a pretty like even pace generally, um, they just seem to like want to really crank it up like for this big finale and really want everything to have like a much bigger finish than I
yeah,
think you really want it, than what really was there. Like they want to crank it up to 11 when really it should have been at an 8, when an 8
yeah.
would have been the perfect mark for
Hmm.
it. Um and like it's weird because it feels like it doesn't resolve, but it also doesn't feel like a cliffhanger. It
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
feel like they're leaving the big Easter egg for what's next, but it also doesn't feel like they've resolved the conflict in a satisfying way. Especially, I think, with a lot of external conflicts going on. Because I think when you think about this, like, there's the internal conflict of Steven and Mark, and I thought that was, really well done. They put a lot of time into that. They spent like a whole episode and a half just on this conflict and this internal conflict that he has and getting you real invested. And so and that's like resolved, but the big external conflict you're kind of checked out on because it's like kind of messy. They completely like forego it for a whole episode
yeah,
and more. You you don't even see Layla or Harrow for an entire episode, and the entire plot just like stops. And so when it has to regain that momentum into its big external conflict climax, it's just not there, and they feel like they need to like ramp it up instead of giving the time that it needs. And it does feel like you could kind of say this for just like the other Disney Plus shows.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I think like um, Hawkeye, the it focused a lot really well on the relationship between Hawkeye and Kate Bishop, and I think their relationship, they spent a lot of time in it, and you really felt the dynamic between the two. But the big bad guy of Kingpin doesn't really show up until that episode of the final episode, as well as
Yeah.
the fact that they also really needed to. Yelena didn't show up until like one or two episodes before, and they have to have big explosive battles in like the middle of New York.
Yep.
And so you can kind of like use that for the other Disney Plus shows. I think what makes the Loki like finale so strong is that it kind of forces just three characters into one room for the vast majority of it.
Yeah. Yep.
So I guess that's my take of it. So like I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, I don't know what it is. Like, I think we've talked about this before, but of any franchise, Marvel really does not need to do this. There's a dedicated fan base. They don't have to have the huge explosive season finale every time to maintain the viewership, right? We're invested, we love this connected universe. We're gonna watch. You don't have to throw all this shit at us, right? But we're seeing it again and again, like you mentioned um Hawkeye. Yeah, the Hawkeye season finale was very reminiscent. Falcon and Winter Soldier, WandaVision, like all of the season finales for these shows, they decide to just throw everything at you. A huge battle, tons of characters, oftentimes characters that are like new to us, like you mentioned Kingpin. We talked about the Scarlet Scarab character here. Like they're just throwing the whole kitchen sink at us, and it's too much. And like I've been saying, they don't need to do it. So I don't know. Like for this show to do it too, man, it sucks because you know I had a lot of problems with the way the show was executed, but I at the same time I respected the show for being something different. They were trying something very different, right? So it was kind of refreshing in a sense. But then, guess what? When it's all said and done, they were just doing the same shit they were doing before, right? They're just doing this big spectacle, big mess of an ending that we've seen time and again. So certainly disappointing. It's not all bad. We've mentioned some positives to the show, but yeah, I definitely have to say it was a disappointment. This show has been a disappointment.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost like this like Disney Plus effect. Like it almost starts it's like almost becoming its own feel of it's like its own type of show where it's a mini series that doesn't quite end but also has to
Yeah.
throw everything to try to end it at once. It's
Hmm.
like the Disney Plus effect.
Yeah. Hey, I actually was gonna leave this for after the ratings, but since you brought it up, let's get right into it. I was gonna pose this question. After seeing the Moon Knight show, I was disappointed, like I was saying. Um, but I wanted to pose the question of, do you think the Disney Plus shows are kind of a quote unquote minor leagues of the MCU,
Hmm.
where the movies are actually the major leagues, right? And maybe more specifically, would you rather have your beloved Marvel character appear as a star of an MCU movie or the star of an MCU show, right? That's maybe the more specific question to the minor versus major league thing. What do you think?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good point.
Right?
Yeah, I think now that these MCU shows and like we've seen enough of these Disney Plus shows, I think for me to, I guess, form more of an opinion. I think initially, I think I remember saying, I think we were talking about Loki that we had our guest on, and I originally thought that the Disney Plus was the big future, that this is where we're going to see most of the MCU content, and that the
Mm-hmm.
movies would largely be in their own world, that this would continue the story. And I think I'm blanking on our guest name, but he said that he was saying it was going to be the opposite. And now I think I think that he's right and I was wrong. I think that the movies are really seem to be furthering the larger. I think they're much bigger in scope. They have a lot of cameos and they do a lot more in as with with like a larger budget, but of course in a smaller amount of time. I think with this, they feel they're kind of somewhere in between. I don't think they found the right groove yet, or at least that's sort of what I'm feeling at this point in time, where they do get some really good character arcs, and I think like the way I've just gone on and on about Oscar Isaac's performance as these characters is really well done, and they put a lot of time into it. But I think the correct hero, villain, protagonist, antagonist balance hasn't truly been found within these yet. And it does feel like you can some of these do feel skippable. I haven't seen Doctor Strange yet. I'm not sure how much WandaVision plays into that, where these kind of do feel like the a bit of the B stories, their own little self-contained things, whereas the movies are seemingly much grander. Of course, that is the movie, and so I think for my I can't really think of a character in particular that hasn't really been added yet or hasn't been mentioned yet. But I don't know. I think like the movies. I think I would pick that because of what we've seen with the MCU do so far with characters being with multiple movies, Like
Yeah.
you'd want them to get the Iron Man and the Captain America treatment where they are featured in various different movies over the course of, several years with the big team up movies. So I would still say, I would still say the movies. Whereas I don't know, maybe I don't know. I think if you might have asked me, I think around the time of Loki, Captain Falcon and the Winter Captain Falcon, um, Falcon and the Winter Soldier and WandaVision, I actually probably would have said I would have liked a Disney Plus show, but now I'm leaning back into the movies.
Yeah, I like that little historical context because I kind of forgot our conversations before where we were really looking at these shows as being the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Now that we're several shows in, is that the case? I don't know, um, so yeah, the thinking back then was, well, there's this huge slate of Disney Plus shows coming out, and clearly they are dedicating a lot of resource. We got to see some trailers, and the quality of these shows seem to be like right on par with the movies. And like, just look at the runtime alone, even in a shorter run series like Moon Knight, 6 episodes, you're getting more runtime than a movie, right? So why wouldn't this be the major leagues of the MCU, right? But as it is now, I'm totally with you. I feel like the shows, the Disney Plus shows, are the minor leagues of the MCU. And yeah, the question about, oh, your beloved character, like the one I was thinking of was Blade.
Ooh,
I'm a big
yeah,
Blade fan, right?
that's a good one.
So he does have a movie in development. But I just kind of thought about it. It's like, oh, what if Blade didn't have a movie in development? Would I rather have a new Blade movie, or would I rather have a Blade series come out, right? And I think prior to Moon Knight, I would have been like maybe 50-50. I'd been like, I don't know, like more Blade, like more like runtime of Blade. Like I'm all for that. Um, but now it's like definitively, I want to see the movie. Like to me, that's how you want to see it. And yeah, it's not to say that I've really disliked these shows, but they do seem to be just a little bit more supplemental, I guess you could say. Um, I mean, we are coming off of Spider-Man No Way Home, and that was just such an epic, amazing event of a movie. So it's hard to sort of like consider the MCU movies as being anything less than like the highest level, the largest stage. Um, but yeah, no, I think over time, I think we're finding that the shows really are more supplemental, and the movies really are the core of the MCU.
Hmm. That does actually bring me a couple questions. I guess so. The first one, because you were talking about like characters, and this is, I mean, like, I first thought is like, what would you think of like an X-Men miniseries? Even though the X-Men's a lot of characters, so and that could be like really broad. Like, would you want to see the X-Men on Disney Plus, uh, or would you rather jump right back into another X-Men movie? Maybe if there's a specific character or a specific team, you know?
That's a good question. I think in terms of an X-Men Disney Plus live action show, that would be cool. I think it might need to be a more minor character though. Yeah, kind of like what I'm saying, like leave the major league stuff to the movies, and then supplemental stuff be the shows. So, the Wolverines and the Cyclops type characters, you know, give them the movie treatment. Don't rinky dink the heavy hitters, right? Um, but shoot, if they announced that they were gonna have a Jubilee live action show, I'd be like, fuck yeah, let's go, right? So yeah, maybe something like that, like a more minor character.
Yeah, like
That would be
I,
cool.
I could see the school being a show, whereas the team is the movie,
That's a good call. Yeah, yeah, right
like the
on.
X-Men class or something like that.
Yeah.
But I guess my other question, so do you think Moon Knight should have been a movie? Would you think you would have liked it more if, because it's about say 5.5 hours, 5.5 to 6, 6 hours. I'm not saying they had to they would have to trim this story, but the general sense of this specific story, would you want to see it in, or do you think this could have just been the next big Marvel movie where they kind of shorten some of the general ideas of it and kind of what's going on, but deliver it in a much faster pace? Like, would you rather have seen Moon Knight as a movie rather than a show?
That's a good question. I'm thinking if they were to try to tell the story that they were trying to tell with this show in a movie format, that would have been, I think, even worse because I think what good stuff you were getting would be diminished. Like all the um backstory stuff of Stephen Grant and Mark Spector would have been more limited, right? They would leave in all the fights and all the CG. What would have been trimmed would be, you know, the character development, right? And that's like pretty much the only good stuff in the show. So I think it was episode 5 where you really get to know uh, the younger years of Mark and Steven, right? And that was pretty powerful, right? And it was good to see that, and some pretty solid character development there. That's the sort of stuff that would have to go, I think, in a movie. So yeah, if they're trying to tell this story in a movie, it probably would have been even worse. That said, if they made a Moon Knight movie that was completely different from this show and made it more like, I don't know, say a Batman movie, sign me up, because I think that could have been pretty cool.
Yeah, that is true. I think the part that I liked the most was the longer character development.
Right, right.
And yeah, that probably would get trimmed first, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Yeah, it kind of makes me sad to think of what could have been. Like, I'm sure there were conversations about should we make a Moon Knight movie? Should we make it a show still, but maybe make it more urban, maybe make it closer to the original Moon Knight comics, where yeah, it is more like a Batman type character. Yeah, what could have came out from all of that? It's just one of those things we'll never know, but it certainly could have been really awesome. But as it is, there were disappointments. But what rating do we give Moon Knight? Let's get to the ratings. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the absolute worst and 5 being the absolute best, what would you give the Moon Knight show? Christian, what are your thoughts?
Hmm. Like it's kind of funny. I was thinking like uh when I was after the final episode and I was like sleeping on it, driving to and from work today, I was thinking like what would I give it? And I think I settled on a 3. I think that like I thought the beginning was like a solid start, a really interesting mystery, and there were some parts I really liked. I really really liked episode 5. I think that was like the high mark of the series, with episode 4 coming in second. Like I said, I like that kind of dungeon crawl. But when I think of the rest of it, the rest I was not as hot on. And now, honestly, now that we've kind of just been talking about it for the past hour, I'm even now like just thinking of lowering it to a 2. Um, because after hearing more of what the comics, kind of what it could have been, I think like the way it would have engaged me as a Batman fan wanting this like crime noir movie and more of that. And yeah, I think I'll settle in on a 2 on this one.
Gotcha. Yeah, understandable. Yeah, I keep mentioning disappointment, and I am definitely disappointed in this show. Like I mentioned, I was really looking forward to this one, and did me wrong. Definitely did me wrong. Um, yeah, I think of some of the cooler stuff in the comics, and look, the show doesn't have to be everything the comics are, but I think some of the imagery of Moon Knight in his all white suit just pummeling the shit out of some bad guys, and they're just blood like flying, and his all white suit is just getting covered in red blood, right? And to me, like that is almost what I see when I think of Moon Knight, right?
That sounds
The
awesome. Yeah, that
right,
sounds way
the
cool.
fist of Khonshu, the fist of vengeance, right? And you know, like I said, the show doesn't have to be, and I might go as far to say can't be everything the comics are, but it is so completely different from the comics. So right off the bat, I was thrown for a loop a bit. I do understand and respect the change they were going for. Yeah. Oh, you mentioned that fourth episode, how it's kind of reminiscent of Indiana Jones action adventure, and that's cool. Like they're going for something different. Like Batman's been done time and again. Let's try something different. Let's do some Indiana Jones shit, something we haven't seen in the MCU before. I get that. That's cool. Oscar Isaac, like we keep saying, is phenomenal in this show. Um, but bottom line, yeah, they dropped the ball with this one, and hugely disappointing. I would say my least favorite MCU Disney Plus show to date, live action, disclaimer. But yeah, definitely had some problems with this one, to say the least. I'll also give it 2 out of 5. And with that, we can wrap up the episode. Oh, one last thing that just popped into my head. And this added just a little bit more disappointment. With the show, I just was not able to get into it. Didn't have a whole lot of fun with it. But I thought, with the season wrapping up in episode 6, maybe they'll give me something cool, a little fan service, a little cameo, Easter egg, something. And they did give us Jake Lockley, the third Moon Knight persona, which was cool. But I was thinking a little bigger. Maybe we might get to see Blade. I don't know, maybe a Daredevil little tease, something. I know there were some rumors that Werewolf by Night would appear. Werewolf by Night is the comic that Moon Knight first appeared in. There really was nothing. There was no trace of a shared universe, really. I mean, I shouldn't say no trace, but there's some Easter eggs there. I think there's a mention of the ancestral plane from Black Panther, I think, but yeah, it was very subtle. And yeah, no crossover appearances to speak of. So that was disappointing for me. Yeah. Any thoughts on your end, Christian, about
Oh
how they
yeah.
really strayed from doing the shared universe thing
You
here?
know, funnily enough, that's actually a part that I liked about it. I liked that it was
Ah.
kind of doing its own thing. It like, and while it was in the MCU, and like, of course, Moon Knight's gonna show up somewhere else. It's it's Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like that it didn't, like, try to do any of that. And it was just wanted to do its own thing with its own characters, and like, and that was different. We haven't seen. It's like we haven't seen a fully self-contained MCU story in a while. Uh, which sounds weird to say. There's zero cameos, zero crossover, and so I thought that was a nice little breath of fresh air. You know, but I mean, I think the other big thing is like, oh, Daredevil.
Yeah.
Are we gonna see Daredevil next?
Yeah.
When are we gonna bring in Daredevil?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I could have used a little of that. I could have
Yeah.
used a little teaser, something. We really got nothing there. And I guess with the disappointment of the season, I thought it would have been kind of cool if they treated the season like a 6-episode origin story, and they would lead to Moon Knight going to New York City and becoming the urban protector there, something like that. And then maybe you get a little, I don't know, Daredevil teaser or something like that. Yeah, just my my hopes and dreams there. But I understand what you're saying. Like, I guess it is kind of cool that they decided to go like completely self-contained here. Um, just would have been cooler if they did a better job of it,
Yeah, I feel you on that part.
Yep, yep. Okay, and with that, we can wrap up the episode. This is farewell from Henry and Christian.